that last margarita, that would have might even been a little spicier.
Tempting with the playground that they have open up now. It's a hoot.
Dude, yes. Our babysitter works there now as a waitress, and she was talking about it. We need to go there more often with that.
They've really spruced the place up. I've been impressed.
I'm excited.
They bounced back after COVID.
Oh, darn it. His name's not on here. I'm just going to look at Sounders.
This is one of those where my background just does nothing.
Tencio and Obed Vargas are ones
Tencio is who I was thinking.
Doyle has them on the fringe. They're not on the official March roster, but I'm trying to remember if there was a roster that came out. What was the one that came out last week? Was that Copa?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Atencio is like a fringe starting 11 guy anyway.
I do think he got an Olympic call up either with Indy. I think with Indy or even before that, he got an Olympic age
at a camp. Yeah,
call up. Yeah, camp.
Yeah, I don't have anyone. I mean, not. I think Morris is the biggest surprise, but he's been not as good. And you're gonna always take Wright over Morris if Wright is playing out wide.
Oh yeah. I hate it, but I think Morris is done.
If Sargent gets injured, it wouldn't shock me if Morris gets a call up instead.
I think we'd go straight to Vazquez at this point.
Yeah, that's a good call. But is Vazquez going to be on the? I think Morris was listed as a possible.
I bet you're right.
Overager for the Olympic.
That would make sense.
And maybe Walker Zimmerman.
I heard.
Yeah, I saw Zimmerman listed somewhere.
Well, you guys want to jump in? Actually, hold on. Yeah.
Do you want to jump in? Is the question.
I gotta pour my cuppa.
See how fast paced we can make this. I do say like
with the four of us.
touch on the transfers stuff during the first part, but then that's the wind down.
Yeah,
okay. Personal opinion.
Sense. That makes sense. Yeah.
Stu, anything you want to fit in this first bit?
No, I don't think so. The only thing I had was I was going to add a note to the Papadopoulos.
I've got it in there.
You got it in there. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, that was the only.
I see.
Thing I had.
Great. I'm gonna highlight. Make sure we hit you on that one.
Hit him hard.
Right upside the head. Okay, here we go. I'm gonna hit record and we'll go. By the seat of our pants, everyone. Welcome everyone to Flyover Footy on the big 550 KTRS. We are presented by. Oh Lord, I'm gonna have to start this over.
I thought I was gonna be the one tonight.
No. I hate coming in late and just turning this thing on without being able to think.
Take two
things through.
This is my favorite night.
Hold on a second. Give me a second. I'm so sorry.
Oh, you take all the seconds you need, man. I'm just looking at scraping the barrel on FB Ref on Jake Girdwood Reich. I wonder if it's normal for U22 targets to not have any data available on them. Because especially defenders. I mean, like, honestly, you're not going to find a whole lot of stats available to check out somebody.
Right. He got 2 red cards this year, didn't
he? Yeah. Yeah. 4 yellows, 2 reds. 26 fouls committed, but 21 fouls drawn. He's hard-nosed. Plays on a razor's edge. Tearing up that A-League.
All right.
Ready?
Yep. Just had to reinforce this silly scatterbrain of mine. Welcome everyone to Flyover Footy on the big 550 KTRS. We're presented by Noble Ice Vineyards. Welcome everybody to a jam-packed show with all of my soccer friends. They're all here tonight. We're going to start with Santiago Beltran. How's it going, man? What's new?
Things are going well, Phil. Nothing new. Just excited about talking football with you guys, and hopefully on Sunday morning we'll have a happy flyover fallout with Matt.
Oh, yes. I want that happiness so badly. Stuart Holtgren's with us. He says he's embracing the silly season. I think we all are, aren't we, Stu?
Oh yeah, it's that time of year that you get so many transfers, and people are sometimes genuine with the transfer rumors and sometimes not. And someone's, agents are trying to hype up players for other moves and this and that. And you just gotta kind of go with the flow and never fall in love with a player, hopefully, before they sign and are holding up that jersey.
Good advice. Matt, how are you doing that? Matt Baker's here. Are you falling in love with anyone a little too soon?
I'm way too overjoyed when we're on a 2-game losing streak right now. Like I'm too excited right now for a team that has lost 2 in a row and has Seattle and Miami coming up. That's the kind of atmosphere that we're living in right now, with the most transfer rumors in a single day that we have to juggle. We've had 2 new ones in a span of like 12 hours. It's just been a wild ride the day that we're recording this on Thursday. And I mean, some of the things we say tonight might be outdated, so we're going to have to try to future-proof this podcast.
Indeed we are, which is going to be impossible. Let's just enjoy it, everybody. I think that's the best part you can take from silly season. I enjoy that we should not fall in love with anyone too soon. Even if you do, enjoy it while it lasts, everybody. It's fun. But we got a lot to talk about today. So I want to jump right into what is happening this week. Everyone's healthy for the first time ever. Matt, you want to talk about?
It really is.
That really surprising announcement today?
I think there might have been one game last year where you could say everybody is available, but you can't really say everybody is healthy. I mean, and so we're looking right now at a scenario where there might not be anybody listed on the player availability report for City on Saturday, but you have some players who are still working their way up to fitness, working their way into game shape, like Josh Yarrow. We don't know the status of Joachim Nilsson, his ability to go 90 minutes. Edu Leuven is a question mark as far as starting goes, but he's not a question mark as far as will he play. So when you're putting your projected starting lineups out there, Edu Leuven, if he's a hit or miss on the starting 11, but he will play. And this is exciting for City. And Roman Berkey and Bradley Carnell both referenced this in their press conference on Thursday, where they're talking about how there's a tension that they can feel in training this week. And it doesn't have to do necessarily with coming off of 2 losses, although you have no doubt that that's a driving force, but it's the fact that everybody's getting healthy and you have all of these people competing for spots. You don't have Tomas Ostrak sliding into the midfield because he's filling Edu Leuven's fighting tooth and nail for that spot. You don't have presumptions with any of these spots. So that's the exciting thing going into Saturday. And you have to hope that this competition, this volume and quality that City now has available to them, produces in the best possible 11 that is hungry for a win.
Santiago, any thoughts on things that have been said this week about health, about the players that are all available? Any interesting stories you'd like to share?
No, it's great to have a healthy team and that internal competition, especially after 2 losses. And I have a feeling we're going to see some things different in the lineup on Saturday night.
I'm excited. I think the big thing that I noticed being said was kind of about Leuven. Yes, he's healthy. Is he sharp? So that's something to kind of watch for in the coming weeks here as we go on through the season. Stuart, I want to start with you. I'd like you to pick one, and we're going to go real light in the main show for the big 550 KTRS here on these transfer rumors. But Stuart, I'd like you to kind of pick one and give us a little talking point on that, if you will.
Oh, I think Matt's pretty giddy about JGR, so I'll leave him on that. But he is tabbed as a potential future Socceroo starting center back. So that's the very light thing on that. Antonios Papadopoulos, he's the 24-year-old Dortmund 2 center back. He, I believe, was under a senior contract with Dortmund 1. He is an interesting one because he also plays defensive midfield from what I can tell. I know there are a lot of people in St. Louis who follow Dortmund, so they might be able to correct us on that. However, doing a little bit of research on him, when he was up with his contract for Dortmund 2 in 2022, Papadopoulos was linked with Luton Town and Preston North End. At the time, Luton Town hadn't yet been promoted, so the Hatters were in the championship. But still an exciting thing. The transfer price was rumored to be 1.5 million euros at the time, so that might give you an idea of what his pedigree is just by valuation. Instead of going with those two clubs, Papadopoulos signed with the Dortmund senior side instead, and I think he was slotted as their 5th center back.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. I know he was considered to be an up-and-comer, one who could be massive in the future for Dortmund, but his contract's up and is clearly available and rumored at this point. Matt, would you like to pick a player to talk about next?
Yeah, on Papadopoulos, because I have no idea how to pronounce half these players' names. First of all, like I had been pronouncing Cedric Teukert's name incorrectly for a period of time, and Marco Reus, I had that one pretty well. But the player who I don't think anybody's having an issue with on their pronunciation is Jake Girdwood-Reich. He's a 20-year-old on May 26th, so he's 19 as we record this, but by the end of the weekend, he'll be 20. Center back in Australia. He is projected to be a center back, though he grew up as a midfielder, defensive midfielder. His team, Sydney FC in Australia, converted him to a center back role this past season. He's an Australian international, youth international, who's had a couple caps for their U20 and U23 side. So he hasn't capped for the national team, but on the youth side, he's had a few appearances. He's under contract with them until June 2026. He's been rumored by Aussie Scout on X to have already been signed by St. Louis City for a club record transfer fee. I mean, this was quite the bombshell rumor that we all woke up to on Thursday morning. The club record transfer fee for Sydney FC stands at about $1.3 million, which they receive for selling Adrian Mrzejowski, see, can't do it, in 2018, an attacking midfielder. So here's the thing about Sydney that I think you guys were alluding to earlier is that a lot of these rumors that we're hearing, both for Papadopoulos, for Girdwood-Reich, even for Cedric Teukert, they had initial reports for transfer fees. Hanover especially was the big story earlier in this spring, is when we were going over Cedric Teukert. It was Hanover's asking price was too much. St. Louis had an agreement, then it was too much. And the thing about this is you have to consider who's driving the information that's being released. Mm-hmm. I mentioned this a few weeks ago that with all of these rumors that's happening, because now we have four fairly confident reported rumors of interest by City, from the seriousness of Cedric Teukert, the shot in the dark of Marco Reus, to now Girdwood-Reich and Papadopoulos. So the level of reporting and the earliness of conversations and the price we're hearing, people who leak this information have something to gain from leaking it. And so if you're Sydney this is not the first time that it's been reported that Sydney FC is in the process of selling a player for a club record transfer fee after this 2018 sale of Adrian Mrzejowski. And that at that time, the club record transfer fee didn't happen. It was about half of that. And so when you hear that Girdwood-Reich might be selling or might be coming to St. Louis City for a club record fee, $1.3 million, I personally think that's overinflated. I don't think that that's an amount of money that Lutz is comfortable spending in what would end up being a U22 initiative player, because at 20 years old, when his contract would be signed, Girdwood-Reich, no matter the transfer fee, this would hit a U22 initiative slot where he would hit the salary books at $150,000, and you can spend whatever you want to acquire him. It's the beauty of the U22 initiative. We currently have 2 players as U22s, Isak Jensen and Chris Durkin. This would be our third. I think this one has legs because it was reported also by Manuel Veth, our friend from Transfermarkt. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm so excited about this one. The youth from Australia who was converted from a defensive midfielder to a center back. And then you start to forecast things we're going to get into more on the wind down, which is what our roster might look like. Why are we targeting seemingly center backs or defensive midfielders? So Girdwood-Reich is my exciting player that we're looking into. But obviously, I think the biggest name out here right now that St. Louis City fans are excited about is Cedric Teukert.
Yeah, and I think that was Toykert was rumored to be going for more at first, right? At some point, someone said it was going to be he was going to be expensive,
Well-
and then Manuel Vick is the one that cut it in half.
Yes.
Is what St. Louis wanted to pay, and then it didn't happen either. And so that's another interesting one. Is it could have happened sooner, and maybe money was the problem. Maybe both rumors were right, kind of that sort of thing. Just to kind of
100%.
put these other rumors into.
And that's why we didn't get Toykert in the spring on the primary transfer window for MLS, because Hanover wanted a transfer fee in the upwards of $1 million, like you said, Phil. Spot on. And St. Louis was trying to bargain it down to around what we paid for Thomas Totland and Nicholas Dewar, around the 500,000 mark. And that wasn't a deal that Hanover was willing to accept. And so they lost out on anything, and they let him walk on a free. And so now this is where Cedric Toykert is coming to St. Louis on a free transfer.
Love it. I mean, maybe it's better this way. Maybe it's not. I mean, I think we would like some more goals, and maybe he could have contributed to that, but we'll see. We'll see how the season plays out. Quickly, Santiago, little Royce update. Berkey had an interesting quote today. I know you were there, so I didn't know if you wanted to kind of touch on that being maybe still an active rumor, or maybe an accidentally shut down active rumor. I don't know how you took it.
No, I think that's still an active rumor. Obviously, there are other parties interested, and we're gonna talk a little bit more about it on the wind down about Charlotte and the discovery rights and another installment of the Baker Classico, as I call it, when there is something between Matt Baker and Charlotte. But Roman Berkey today, and he wasn't asked specifically about Marco Royce, but he was asked about in general, are you involved in conversations about
Bringing players in?
Yeah, bringing players in, and he was like, no, I'm not. And then he said, I tried my best with Marco Royce, and I am still trying, although I trust the decision makers. But it's great that he said he is still trying. So to me, that means that there is still something there.
Love it. That's fun stuff. That's it from Transfer Rumors on the main part of the show here on the Big 550 KTRS. As we always do say, and if you haven't heard us before, please do check out our podcast version. We do a wind down after this first 45-minute segment, and we really get down and dirty and talk kind of about the details and kind of get a little loose with our conversation. So please do join us, because that is going to be a fun one to listen to, arguing over who's replacing who's coming in, who's not coming in. It's great. It's good stuff. Lots of options to be talked about there. Matt, let's start talking about Seattle Sounders playing this weekend. You may be on your way to the game right now, listening to the Big 550 KTRS. You're about to watch Seattle Sounders. Matt's here to get you ready. Enjoy.
This is one of those few teams that St. Louis has not pulled a result against. It was a team that stopped St. Louis cold in their tracks last season. One of those teams like Minnesota United, where we played them right after our 5-game winning streak in 2023, and they shut us down 3-0. They also ended our season on a very sour note going into the playoffs, winning 2-0 at City Park on the decision day matchup. So St. Louis coming into this, whether they admit it or not, looking for a measure of revenge. So where do these teams stack up right now? Well, St. Louis is still somehow holding firm at 9th place in the West after a couple really poor results against LAFC and FC Cincinnati. Thanks to the Seattle Sounders, actually, we have a 9th place standing right now, as they almost jumped us last week, but lost their lead against the Vancouver Whitecaps. So St. Louis sits 3-3-7 in 13 games with 16 points and a -1 goal differential. Like we talked about on Fallout last week, is the first time St. Louis has gone negative in the goal differential this season. They have a 3-1-3 home record that was just recently blemished, so they're looking to not make it 2 back-to-back home losses. Their form in the last 3 MLS games, well, right now we're just trying to stop the bleeding. The last win was 2 weeks ago against Chicago 3-1, but it kind of feels like an eternity ago. Back-to-back losses against LAFC and against FC Cincinnati will do that in rather ugly fashion, 2-0 and 3-1 respectively. But Seattle is really not coming into this too much better. Like I said, they sit 10th in the West, just below St. Louis, on a 3-6-5 record, 3 wins, 6 losses, 5 draws in 14 games, 1 more than City, and they have 14 points, so 2 less than St. Louis, also with a -1 goal differential, though where St. Louis has scored 19 and allowed 20, Seattle has scored 16 and allowed 17. Seattle is 2-5-1 away this year. So not a good record, but their away record, they've got more wins away than they do at home. Their last 3, not much better than St. Louis. A win 2 weeks ago against Portland in the Cascadia Cup match, but then after that, it was a loss 2-0 to RSL and a draw against the Vancouver Whitecaps 1-1 last week, where they gave up a lead in the dying minutes of this match. That losing the lead has ramifications for the St. Louis match because it was Nuhu, their left back, who had a penalty called on a handball in the box, his second yellow card, and so he's not going to be available. We've got more on Nuhu in a little bit. But aside from that last week against Vancouver, Seattle did play a midweek U.S. Open Cup match against the Phoenix Rising in the USL Championship, and they did get the result, 2-1 win, but they had very few first-teamers. It was very obvious they were prioritizing the St. Louis match in MLS. Nuhu started. We also had Christian Roldan started, and then we had Jackson Reagan, Alex Roldan, and Cody Baker, all projected players subbed in the second half. A much rotated roster from Seattle. And then Seattle's form going into this in general this year, they failed to score a goal in 6 of their 14 matches, and they only have 3 matches out of that 14 where they've scored more than 1 goal. This is a team that has been anemic in their ability to put not only shots on net, but also find the back of the net. And I talked to Jeremiah Oshan from Sounder at Heart, who runs a fantastic Sounders blog, and he said that they've had a very up and down start. The Sounders got off to a disastrous start, going 0-2-3 in their first 5, but have mostly managed to steady the ship since then. In the 9 games since then they've played at that time, they're 3-3-3. It's not supporter shield pace, but it's definitely an improvement from where they started.
Yeah, let's just keep going here, Matt. There's a lot more to talk about with Seattle. I'd like to hear a little bit more about what they're going to look like, some of their key players, key notes for St. Louis as well.
Honestly, there's a few keynotes from Seattle to look for before we get into what things are looking like on the St. Louis side. For Seattle, it's been their inability to score. Like I mentioned, Jeremiah Oshan provided some details that the Sounders continue to be very effective at possessing the ball and tilting the field in their favor. So they're good at getting the team into the final third and keeping teams out of their own final third. But once they get into the final third, the attack tends to just break down, and they're not able to produce any shots on target once they get into that penalty area. The Sounders really don't seem to quite trust themselves, and they lack that kind of incisiveness that they need to finish the ball. Not dissimilar to what we've talked about St. Louis finding that lack of a finishing shot. The Sounders are struggling just as much as St. Louis, if not more, because they're also struggling to just get shots off into that final third, into the penalty box. All too often, Jeremiah said, their offense has turned into just hope that Raul Ruidiaz can score a banger. And in fact, the way he analyzes their 14 goals so far, he only credits about 6 as what he'd call repeatable actions, which isn't nearly enough to sustain anything for the Sounders. And beyond their inability to shoot, finish, score, Nuhu's absence in this game is going to be a factor. Seattle starting left back Nuhu, who has started every MLS match so far, is out against St. Louis after picking up those 2 yellow cards I mentioned against Vancouver. And Jeremiah says that Nuhu's been very effective with his defensive presence, so that's going to be a downgrade. Most likely, Seattle's going to run in Cody Baker, who actually saw time, like I mentioned, in the U.S. Open Cup match, who could be an improvement when the Sounders are in possession, moving the ball up the field. But like we're going to get into, that's not a lot of what Seattle does with the ball, moving their left back up high. And so because he's definitely a step down defensively, it's going to be interesting to see what that net impact is as Seattle, to see if Seattle keeps their shape in moving their right back, Alex Roldan, high, or if they try to have some kind of a different shape because that defensive stalwart in Nuhu isn't there. Berkey and Carnell were downplaying that, as you would expect. Berkey on Thursday said that with Nuhu out, he's obviously strong defensively. He's a fast guy who looked really good the last time they played him, but he doesn't know if it's a weakness because at the end of the day, they have to bring their game to show that they can take advantage of something like that. And Bradley Carnell mentioned they don't change their game plan, but they look to exploit the things that they've done themselves. He didn't really call out a changing tactics offensively for St. Louis because Nuhu is out. And alongside Nuhu being out with a red card, Seattle is suffering from some injuries here and there. Jeremiah says there have been some hope that Josh Atencio would be back in time for the game, but it doesn't look like he will be. Leo Chu, likewise, who was an assist monster early last year, was also likely to be out. Pedro de la Vega is still working his way back from an 11-week absence. And I know, Santi, you had asked Bradley Carnell about Pedro de la Vega and what he might look like if he is able to play in this game. So Jeremiah says that he might be able to go as many as 30. So look for him to possibly be a difference maker in the second half. But ultimately, Raul Ruidiaz is the X factor up front, at least. Once they get the ball into that final third, is expected to start, but he's also dealing with a foot injury. So he might not be 90 minutes fit. A lot of key players in these areas, from the delivery and what Leo Chu can offer, Pedro de la Vega and his young DP presence, Raul Ruidiaz having that inability to probably go 90 minutes. Seattle has some issues that St. Louis could take advantage of, especially late in the game.
Yeah, and thinking about Seattle, one of the things that people raved about with Seattle was their quality of defense. I think that's still kind of there, but I always think of you, Santiago. Yemar's in that back line. I've always thought he looked really good for them. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts on their defense or any of their other players.
Yeah, no, Jamar has been in the last 2 years has been one of the key players in defense for Seattle. But just thinking about this game, yeah, two teams that come to it with a little bit of a struggle during the season. Matt mentioned that Seattle didn't start the season really well, only with a couple of draws in 5 games. But they don't have amazing numbers, but have starting to get some wins, and yeah, they have a lot of players that are injured, but I think it's still a dangerous team, and obviously a team that not only City didn't get any points from last year. City didn't score any goals against Seattle Sounders. Was the only team, uh, Western Conference rival, excluding playoffs, that got 6 out of 6 points against City. And just knowing how strong they have been in the last few years in the league, they even won CONCACAF Champions Cup. It is one of those rivals, one of those opponents that you like to have a big test again, and hopefully get 3 points. You got to start winning against some of these big teams in the conference and in the league, and starting with Seattle will be.
Santiago makes a really good point there, Stuart. That that's too. I mean, always losing against Seattle, and that seems like a monkey on our back. It almost feels like, I know that we mentioned it over and over every time we play Seattle, but that first game where we tried to go with 3 center backs and it just like did not work, and it just feels like Bradley Carnell has not been able to kind of figure out Seattle. It may not be that, it could be the players, but it's just, I get that vibe. I didn't know if you felt anything about that or any of the players or thoughts on Seattle that we might be facing this Saturday.
Well, of course, Schmetzer is a really, he's one of those all-time great MLS coaches now at this point. He's been around for ages in Seattle. One familiar face that we talked about it last year that we'll see again this year for us in St. Louis, and for some older listeners, they'll know him as a St. Louis Storm veteran. And for some of us, we know him as the former head coach of St. Louis FC. But Preki returns to St. Louis again. I think he might, at this point, have won more games as an assistant coach for Seattle visiting St. Louis than he did as St. Louis FC head coach.
You just had to add visiting St. Louis, though. Jeez.
Yeah. So yeah, no, it'll be exciting to see him. One of the things about Seattle that I've always appreciated is they do such a good job incorporating their path to the professional first team. We've seen it over the years with Tacoma Defiance players in USL Championship, and then when they moved over to MLS Next Pro, and then they always have a few core guys. Matt was talking about this before we went live. A few core guys who they kind of move together as a cohort up the ladder. And interestingly enough, Sam Adeniran actually, when he played for Tacoma Defiance, played with about 7 or 8 of those guys. The only one that we'll probably see starting will be Cody Baker, but I'm sure that'll be, well, keep your eye on Sam and see just how he treats this match.
Yeah, looking up and down the Seattle roster, there are so many players that are from Seattle, still playing for Seattle, that started at a young age. When I think of what I would like St. Louis's academy to look like, that is definitely, Seattle's one of those teams that comes to mind for my hopes and dreams of a better future with our youth. Not to belabor that point, though, Matt, I know, again, we said perhaps Bradley Carnell feels like there's a monkey on his back against Seattle. I know you can kind of educate us a little better on that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody can call this a rivalry until we actually get a result. Santi mentioned that this is the team that we haven't even gotten a draw against. And Bradley Carnell mentioned this against teams like Sporting KC and Chicago, that you can't call anybody a rivalry until you have a back and forth on the field. And this is Bradley Carnell's opportunity to get that monkey off his back in the possession-oriented style that Seattle is very adept at. And it comes at a time where a lot of opinion about what this game means for St. Louis City is that it's another must-win game. We referenced this against Chicago, and I don't want to say it too often to make it be cliche, but you do have to have these moments during the season, multiple times during the season, where things start to get rocky. And we're not the only team, far from it, who have lost 2 games in a row. FC Cincinnati's lost 2 games in a row. Seattle's lost 2 games in a row. You've got other teams who are quality in the top of the table. They're going to finish quality at the top of the table, and they've had 2-game losing streaks. But there's a massive difference between a 2-game losing streak and a 4-game losing streak. And if we lose against the Seattle Sounders at home, I don't think anybody's going to have any confidence that we won't have a 4-game losing streak, knowing that Messi and company are waiting at Inter Miami on June 1st in Fort Lauderdale. So I do say this is a must-win game. And what that means is that Bradley Carnell, I think, can't get outside of himself. So you look at what that means big picture, but you have to keep the focus on this one individual game. And that's where the big, I guess, impetus is going to be for the way that Bradley Carnell runs this out. Is he said on Wednesday what they need to improve on from the FCC game was the ability to connect those big moments. He still feels like this team is progressing the ball well. They're putting themselves into good chances in the final third, but they need to be more efficient in those transition moments. And we saw them working on it in training this week. They did have trainings this week that were far more high energy, high intensity than what we saw on Tuesday's Inside City event. So I can promise you that. And what they were working on and the manner that they were conducting themselves, it really seemed like this was, everybody knew the stakes that this match had. It was coming back home, where everybody has said from Parker to Berkey on down the line that home matches are, you would expect to win. And I think that's what City's taking into this. And it really does benefit City to have everybody healthy. They might not be 90 minutes fit, like we said, but everybody's healthy, including Josh Yarrow. And you see Edu Leuven, and you wonder if this is the game that he's going to make his presence felt on the field. He got a run out against Cincinnati, and that was fantastic to see, get his sea legs under him a little bit. He looked okay, and you could see where he was slotting in at the 8 in the central midfield, where he pushed Thomas Ostrak higher when he entered. But regardless of what Edu Leuven starts, he can be that difference maker, both physicality off the ball and with his set piece work especially. I don't know if Thomas Ostrak immediately goes to the bench when Leuven comes out. There's an argument to be made about who's more in form right now, Ostrak or Indy. But I think when Edu Leuven comes on the field, it's not just how he plays at the 8, but it's his demeanor on the field, it's his set piece taking, and it's everything that he can change and affect just by being Edu Leuven and providing that little extra level that we have. It just adds, we talk about adding depth to City in not missing a piece when a high-level player is out. Well, now we're adding that extra quality of player in Edu Leuven coming in. And so you have to look at this midfield battle, like Albert Rosnak, João Paulo versus Edu Leuven and Chris Durkin. That could be a key, absolute key matchup that takes place. And that's a note for St. Louis that I think it can't go overlooked, is what's going to occur in the midfield when Edu Leuven's on the field.
Yeah, and I'll be excited to have those starting midfielders, whatever they look like, back again, because I do love the way our midfield looks with, Durkin, Ostrak, Leuven. Of course, we're going to enjoy that much better. At least I will. And one last thing I wanted to kind of add to that, Matt, is I just want to repeat what you said in our last show on KTRS about the quality of those, final assist balls, those key passes needing to be better, because I did see this chart that was making the rounds on Reddit showing that expected goals, expected assists for St. Louis is combined one of the highest in all of MLS, even though the finishes haven't been there. And so, I'm looking at, I've been following Klaus to see, is it Klaus's fault? Is it not Klaus's fault? I've enjoyed some of what the pundits have said about him pulling double duty on finishing and playmaking, which is interesting, but he has gotten his non-penalty XG up to 0.46, even after the last game. It was looking pretty good after the Chicago game again. So that's not bad. We need to get it a little higher. And again, just like those quality assists is something that I just want to remind everybody is something I've been looking forward to seeing that improve, especially because the other stuff's there, right? Matt, we have one more thing we can touch on before we kind of do our predictions, if you'd like to.
Yeah, there's some interesting stats and how they break down. Like, we know the players to watch for. We've got Jordan Morris, Albert Rusnak, Christian Roldan, Raul Ruidiaz. The Carnell's big focus in the players is Albert Rusnak. He said that Rusnak's a game changer and can dictate and elevate the pace of play, knows when passes are needed, and he can change things up with his link-up play, and City knows that they have to manage him. So Albert Rusnak, I mentioned Raul Ruidiaz, the X factor in the attack. Albert Rusnak is that X factor in ball progression, how they move the ball up the field and how he can defend centrally. But when you look at how these teams match up, we know that St. Louis, in how they move the ball up the field, lowest sequence time, fewest passes per sequence, quickest direct speed. Seattle's almost the opposite and plays to the fact that you would think of them as a possession-oriented team. They're 21st in sequence time. They're 20th in fewest passes per sequence and 20th in direct speed. So they're very methodical in how they move the ball up the field. They can press, but they're not high pressing at times. They're 9th lowest in PPDA, whereas St. Louis is 5th lowest passes per defensive action. They can press high, but they like to pressure mostly in a mid block. So their engagements are going to come between the half lines and their defensive 18-yard box. The stat that I look at, and this is my stat of the night, is building on the passing sequences. The appetizer for this stat is the completed short passes. And Seattle is 4th in MLS in completed short passes. St. Louis is 2nd to last. And that lines up with what you know about St. Louis, but it gives you an idea for Seattle. Now, with those 4th in the league short passes, I look to the number of direct attacks. This is the number of open play sequences that start inside the team's own half and have at least 50% movement towards the opposition goal and ends in a shot or a touch in the opposition box. St. Louis is 20th. Seattle is 23rd. So if you think of all of the possession numbers that they have, you think of the fact that Seattle has a lot of offensive passing sequences with high number of touches. They're 7th in 10 plus offensive passing sequences and 10th in offensive passing sequences that end in a shot. But they're also 23rd when it comes to direct attacks. So this is the number of moving the ball up the field that ends in those shots. What it means is that Seattle will lead in possession. They'll have the ball for long sequences. They'll have these short passes, but that's all they do. They pass the ball around. They're not adept at efficient ways to get the ball into the final third to generate a shot. And this is where St. Louis has a really huge advantage. This is where St. Louis can disrupt Seattle and leveraging St. Louis's press in a different way potentially. So while they're disrupting space and Seattle owns the wings, we know they possess the ball down through both of their wings. St. Louis might be decently served by setting up in a mid block of sorts and being very, very different and methodical with how they press and where they're pushing Seattle a lot. Jeremiah Oshan says Seattle's still very possession heavy, but they look for opportunities in the counter press, not nearly as aggressively as they were last year. So this isn't a team that's really going to be sitting back, waiting for a chance, and then counter pressing and beating you on the run because they're not very adept this year at those finishes. And that's where a lot of opportunity rises for St. Louis. And in addition, the last thing I'll say is Bradley Carnell mentioned on Thursday, the city's trying to be more of an unpredictable team. They view Seattle as they can be unpredictable and how Raul Ruidiaz can drop underneath. Jordan Morris can run in behind just as much as they can build on the wings leading up to a cross of sorts. But St. Louis has worked out well on being unpredictable because they think that Seattle does that very well. And St. Louis is trying to do that a little bit more, both in transition and with their short passes, offering a different dimension and being a little bit more clinical in their first touches with the ball.
Good stuff, Matt. I'd like to give Santiago and Stu a chance to give one more thought before we move on to our lineups as well. Santiago, let's start with you. Anything you'd like to say before this game happens?
Yeah, the one thing Matt made me think about when he was talking about Seattle being unpredictable at times is when looking at last year's games between Seattle and St. Louis. Seattle was very dangerous with the long balls, so that's something to keep an eye on, especially the way they are playing and trying to be a little bit unpredictable. I think City will need to keep an eye on those on Saturday.
Good stuff. Stuart, any last thoughts before we do our lineups?
I'm curious to see how the grass, did anyone talk about the grass again at the press conference, or we assume it's fully seated in? I'm just curious how a guy like Jordan Morris might approach this match if probably doesn't know that the grass is new, to be fair, but a guy with a pretty traumatic history of knee injuries. But I'm just interested to see some of their young players. They're always fun to watch. Cody Baker and Reed Baker Whiting. I know someone in the chat mentioned him earlier, and that he's a fun one to watch. He's not injured, correct? He's available?
He's available, yeah.
Okay, yeah. He's a left back.
Yeah, definitely. I echo that as well. I'm excited about the young players. Again, I enjoy that. Lastly, Santiago, you mentioned those long balls, and it's just, at the beginning of the season, I'm not sure how this played out. I don't watch a lot of Sounders, but I do know that they were really excited to get Pedro de la Vega into that team because it seemed like they were a little bit too much of a straight line team. There's not like a playmaker per se. Roldan can serve that very nicely at times, especially in MLS. But they were excited about him because he's a bit of a Celio Pompeo type player, maybe on steroids, you could say, because he's a dribbly boy. He can draw defenders. And so if he is able to play even in, 20, 15, 30-minute stint at the end of this game, it is something to watch for. He will be able to draw defenders. Not a playmaker, but, drawing defenders can be its own kind of playmaking in a way. So something to watch there from me because Leo Chu and Morris are really similar, straight line kind of guys. That'll be a change of pace. All right, guys, let's do it. Let's do our predictions on the lineup.
Do we want to start with?
Oh, go ahead.
Do we want to start with Seattle's? Because Jeremiah Oshan gave us Seattle's predicted starting lineup based on what he saw and noted that while they list their lineup as a 4-2-3-1, they kind of look more like a 3-4-3 in possession, moving Alex Roldan up a little bit. So what he says their lineup might look like, given some of the injuries, limitations, is Stephen Fry in goal, Cody Baker at left back, Jackson Reagan, Yeimar, Alex Roldan makes up their back line, João Paulo, Christian Roldan in the midfield, and then you have Jordan Morris, Albert Rusnak, Obed Vargas, and Raul Ruiz Diaz as their attacking mids and forwards. It's a pretty strong looking lineup from Seattle. And so what I have, I'll go first, guys, for my predicted starting 11. I've got an equally starting lineup for St. Louis, and I'm extremely excited about this. Roman Berkey in net, Anthony Markanek left back, Joachim Nilsson and Tim Parker center backs, Thomas Totland back in at right back, Chris Durkin and Edu Leuven in center mid, Celio Pompeu, Indiana Vassilev, Rasmus Alm, and Klaus up top. I debated Ostrak for Indy, but we haven't seen Ostrak spend a decent amount of time yet in that 10, so I see Ostrak coming in. I probably for Leuven, but you never know what that might look like. And then obviously Sam has his place in the second half, and it'll almost certainly be rotation significant for those attacking players. It looks a lot like the last few weeks, but definitely I would look for Edu Leuven to start this game.
That's your baseline, everybody. Now we're going to play with it a little bit. Santiago, what do you have?
I don't have Leuven starting, but I have something that has worked, that had worked before and was a repeated lineup multiple times. Although I have a little bit of a change. So I have Berkey, Markanek on the left side, Heaver, Parker as center backs, Thomas Totland on the right side, then defensive midfielders Dorkin and Ostrak, then in front of them Celio on the left, Vassilev in the middle, Rasmus Alm, and for a change, since he's playing his former team, I have Sam Adeniran starting.
Ooh.
That's a good shout. And yeah, it's an interesting one, Leuven versus Ostrak in the start, because there was a comment about sharpness with Leuven, like I said earlier. Stuart, what do you think?
I'm going to go with Berkey and net, Markanek on the left, and instead of Nielsen or Hebert, I'm going to go with Yarrow, who I believe will be fully back and healthy and ready to go. Parker, Totland, Durkin, Leuven, Celio, Indy, Alm, and Klaus up top. And I think we'll see AZ and Sam and Ostrak for sure in the second half.
Interesting. Who'd you have as the 10 or next to Celio and Alm?
Leuven.
One thing I was thinking, though, if Leuven doesn't start and Ostrak would start in the midfield, if not Leuven, that would provide an interesting opportunity. So, like, if Leuven subbed in the second half, Ostrak doesn't have to sub out. Ostrak can move up if one of the other attackers. So that could be an interesting look if Leuven doesn't start. And maybe I lose out on my consensus starting 11 with you guys on the weekend, but I wouldn't be opposed to that, where you'd have Leuven come in to get 30, 40 minutes or so in the second half, and it gives more freedom and flexibility to who you can take out it doesn't have to be that like for like with Ostrak, because you can move Ostrak up to the 10 or the wings. There's a lot of flexibility that could offer, in addition to getting Leuven a little bit more, but not quite a full half.
Yeah, I have no disagreements with Matt, actually. I would put exactly Matt's lineup out there, and that's what I would guess Bradley would do as well. Hebert, it's been interesting to see Hebert in there, even when we think Nilsson might be fully healthy, and it makes me wonder if Leuven is the same way. And so I don't disagree with any other lineups, but, even though we thought Nilsson would jump right in the second he was healthy, will that be true for Leuven? Will it not be? I also have enjoyed, for our nerdiest listeners, I've enjoyed some of our DMs talking about Ostrak versus Indy at the 10.
Yes.
And what Matt just brought up exactly is like Leuven could come in for Ostrak if Ostrak starts, or vice versa. And any of those players could play the 10, could play the 8. Indy could play out wide at some point. There's just so many options. We're spoiled for choice for the first time this season, and there's players coming in, guys. This competition is going to be a fun one to watch, and I've enjoyed getting to talk about all of these players as possible starters and subs. We got the time, so let's do our score prediction as well. Matt, what do you think?
2-1 St. Louis.
Senti?
Same, 2-1 St. Louis.
Stu?
I'll do 1-0 St. Louis.
I will also say 1-0 St. Louis. Let's see
I
if
like
we can
that.
hold a struggling Seattle at bay. And I imagine some Berkey saves could be in the works on that one if it happens. So that's it from us, guys, on the regular portion on the big 550 KTRS. We are presented by Noble Ice Vineyards. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. Enjoy the game. We'll talk to you next time.
And if you're joining us on stream, we will take a short break, and then we'll be back for our wind down, where we will dig fully into the transfer rumors and some U.S. Open Cup news, right, Phil?
Open Cup, yeah, lots of good stuff with that, actually. But I think there's one especially we'll talk about, and I just want to say that is the tightest show we've ever done with 4 of us here. Don't you think? Wasn't
Dude,
that like
you ran a tight ship on that?
No, I think everybody did a great job. We had a lot of nice, short and concise, good takes from everyone. It was awesome.
Yeah, I got to work on my pronunciations. Elliot in the chat, Baker Whiting plays both right and left back. He also plays up top in the past. So, I mean, he's
a converted midfielder, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, he was one of those guys who was just so good in the youth setup that they kind of bounced him around. But I know he played left back against us last year in the St. Louis game, I think.
I think so, too.
It's one of those jack of all trades, master of none situations.
Yeah, that's fair.
Where you're a utility player, but if you're a utility player, you're never going to find a starting spot unless somebody's out. On that note, I'll be right back. Stu, are you there? I can't wait to hear if Stu gets to hang out with us during the wind down, because he's done with grad school. If you haven't congratulated Stu on graduating with his, I believe, MBA, do that if you get a chance.
Oh, man, Matt, I really got to learn how to pronounce people's names. Papadopoulos.
Well, I have zero room to talk, having said Cedric Tukert for weeks now. And then I'm looking up interviews with him online, and I see 2 German folks, not Teukert himself, but 2 German announcers who had versions of it. It was Teukert with a hard K, or it was like Teuchert.
Oh.
But I think that was just an accent thing. I think Teukert is the way to go.
Well, did you see the guy he's a Luligan, if I'm not mistaken, or he's in the drum line, but he was saying pronunciations. It was like a really soft R too, which if you hear like a
Toykit.
German, I always think of like a German saying Dortmund is more like Dortmund.
Toykit.
There's
Yeah.
so like Toykit.
Well, shout out to Chris Gebhardt, who didn't need any recovery time from his health issues to remind everybody that it's. I think he said. I think he reminded with his toy, and then I saw somebody else. It might have been Chris, who was like, it's a combination of, like toy and yogurt with a k in the middle, something like that.
And we do our best, right?
However,
because Leuven is like not Leuven, right? It's an O sound that we butcher as Americans, right?
Yeah, there's other players who have been with St. Louis for like 2 years, and it's like Jabulu Blom. I cannot tell you how stressed out I was when we were first signing him. It's like Christmas time 2022, and I was like, I can't talk about him unless I know how to pronounce his name. And I was scouring YouTube, and everybody does it just a little bit differently. Some people pronounce the N a little bit harder. Some people just go with the J. And then Blom, a lot of people, like, I'm convinced it's Blom. It's not Blom. It's not Bloom.
Oh yeah.
I'm because I've watched so many videos. It's Blom, and that trips a ton of people up because it's not like it's a short, easy name, but it's not. He's South African. It's not American English type thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then so you start introducing like Toykert and Royce, which in hindsight, it's an E and a U, and they're both German. But then you've got the Greeks who have entered the conversation. The Greeks have entered the chat, and late in the day on Thursday, suddenly Antonios Papadopoulos becomes it's so much. But I do have a fun fact as we kick this off. So I want to make sure I get my fun fact in on the pod and not just shooting the shit with you guys.
Sounds good. I want to look. My wife is Greek. We're going to Greece in July.
Oh, nice.
I'll actually be gone for like 2 weeks straight. So we need to actually plan for that. I meant to tell you earlier.
Okay.
But
maybe it's during Leagues Cup where we won't be covering anything.
Right. Maybe we'll get lucky. But yeah, Papadopoulos seems right based on all of her family members' names. So
for some reason, I feel like that's a popular name, Papadopoulos.
Yeah, I think it is. What is Jesse Kostopoulos? What is it on Full House?
Kostopoulos, yeah.
I forgot what it is. That's wrong, but all right. Let's just go.
Huh.
I'd like to apologize for that. Welcome, everyone, to the wind down.
I've Noble Ice Vineyards has been fantastic as a sponsor, and they provided some things that we're going to be able to offer some of our listeners as far as giveaways and things like that. But I told myself I'm not going to pop open a bottle of Noble Ice Vineyards until after we win, so that it could carry on a win streak. I could open it to try and right the ship, but I'm going to wait. And so I've got, like, if you're watching the live stream, I've got some nice ones back here that are waiting for a St. Louis City win.
I am so excited. So when I went to Total Wine, I got a Norton and I think it was a Chamberson. That's probably wrong, actually, but it's a white, right? And that was all only options at the one I went to. I found out they had a rosé a couple weeks ago, and I am excited to try it. I got to go find it. I'm a big fan of rosé in the summertime, especially spring into summer. It's perfect. So.
Oh, for sure. So, Phil, do you want to get right into the transfers?
Yeah, I think that's where we should go straight to. Don't you?
I think we properly teased it on the KTRS portion, and we were much quicker than I thought we were going to be. I legitimately thought we were going to spend 5 or 10 minutes more time, but there's a lot to get into, not just with the individual players, but how they fit into St. Louis City and what the idea is that we can try to derive from the specific players and positions that he's targeted. So, first off, just laying the groundwork, St. Louis has a couple of open roster slots. We have one open international roster slot right now. That is because we have 2 players on loan. So that's where we stand right now in just who's available to sign. We only have 2 U22s. We have 3 DPs. And we have to start with the biggest. I think we have to start with the absolute biggest. Cedric Toykert depending on when you're listening to this, may have already signed with St. Louis City. The level of rumors that have escalated on, as we're recording this on Thursday, May 23rd at night, is borderline insane. We have two reporters now, MLS insiders for DiMarzio. I think that's a Sky Sports outlet. Yes, it is a Sky Sports International outlet that have reported that and confirmed that Cedric Toykert has already signed his contract with St. Louis City SC, saying the forward will arrive as a free agent at the end of his contract with Hannover 96 in July. And they noted that he added 12 goals, 3 assists in 28 appearances between the two Bundesliga and the DFB this season. If you have been paying attention on social media, you saw that Cedric Toykert, thanks to Tim's Bucket Hat on X, posted a story to his Instagram that was an image from downtown St. Louis looking from the Arch grounds back towards One Metropolitan Plaza and tagged his agent in it. So the breadcrumbs have reached epic proportions here. The signing is right around the corner. And earlier in the show, when I talked about can we future-proof this pod, I was borderline about to say, breaking news, Cedric Toykert has been signed by St. Louis City SC. Just so we could do that. But I don't want to rock the boat, so I'm not going to go that far. But at any point over the next few days, you might be listening to this Friday or Saturday, that could be a thing. And if it's not, then that's fantastic. But even Manuel Veth on Thursday night had said that he's going to bed in Germany. By the time he wakes up, Toykert might be announced.
Right.
Yeah.
We're that close.
He all but said it. Yeah.
And so then it becomes, okay, let's remind everybody what Toykert would do for St. Louis City. Toykert's name first came up in replacements for Nico Gioacchini after we sold him to Como FC earlier this season. And he was the only named player of five or six that were reported by Manuel Veth to be targets for St. Louis City as striker replacements. And he scouts out, he matches up as that second striker, the poacher, the similar to Nico Gioacchini player who would play well with Klaus. And that's, I think, what everybody is most excited about, not just because St. Louis City has had a finishing problem this season, but we haven't replaced Nico Gioacchini, both in terms of his roster slot and his contributions to the team, I would argue. We have significantly less goals that we've scored, but he had a 10-goal performance season last year. And so not just what he did single-handedly, or rather as the sole striker in replacement of Klaus, but what he was able to do off the ball, drawing fouls, playing the ball into space, and creating chances that are a little more quality, more dangerous than we would want. His experience is in the two Bundesliga and the Bundesliga, coming from Hanover. Obviously, they've been in the two Bundesliga for a bit. And this is the guy that Lutz has clearly been targeting. And so the last time, honestly, that Lutz had targeted a player but didn't get him for a period of time, that's Thomas Totland. And we're seeing what's happening with Thomas Totland when Lutz sees a guy and he's committed to going after him, it tends to have positive impacts. Yeah. And Cedric Toykert was that target early on, February, March. He was, if St. Louis City could have agreed to a transfer price with Hanover, and we talked about this in the main portion, then he would already be in St. Louis playing for City. But Hanover wanted that $1 million plus transfer fee to get him out of his contract early. St. Louis was willing to pay about half of that. They couldn't agree with the price. St. Louis has to wait. And now it seems like we're about to land our guy.
Interesting too, is we've saved $1 million or so, right?
Yeah.
And so as we list off these other rumors, sometimes you might think, well, what are we about to spend that much money? That's a lot of players. Where do we come up with an extra $1 million for each one of these players? Well, that's at least by waiting, by having patience, whether we wanted to or not, that $1 million might have been saved. So that's pretty cool. You could also see it as 500,000 being saved. Santiago, I see you reacting to a lot of these comments. Any favorite thoughts or any new thoughts you have about Toykert?
So the one thing I like the most, and Matt and I were talking about it this morning, is that assuming this all goes through and is announced soon, he basically he will be here like really early, not compared to like when Nuke Vitoris and Anthony Markanik came last year. We even talked about the possibility of can he start training with the team before the transfer window, and we think it's possible based on what we saw with Roman Berkey when he came in 2022. Obviously, I'm sure he will still have some off season, and then come to St. Louis and start basically he needs to go through preseason, but I think he could start as early as the transfer, not a start, but be with the team and be an option as soon as the transfer window starts. And not only him, but seeing all these other rumors, I feel like this year St. Louis is trying to get players like early, especially considering that after the Leagues Cup break, St. Louis only has 9 games. So the sooner you get these players, the sooner you get them signed, get their paperwork done, the sooner they can come to St. Louis and getting acclimated to the team and hopefully contributing right away.
Matt, what is so when does the window open? Like when, and also can he train before then, officially or unofficially?
Yeah, perfect thing for people to remember is that the secondary transfer window for MLS opens July 18th. And so Cedric Toykert or whoever we sign would not be eligible to play for St. Louis until at least July 18th. The first game we have after that is Sporting Kansas City on July 20th. Then we have the Leagues Cup break, like Santi said, and then 9 matches after that. So there's an obvious pathway to saying Toykert will be available starting after Leagues Cup, getting the time in preseason, his preseason, which would be his first few weeks with St. Louis after his holiday, after finishing his Hanover season. But I don't think there's anything spelled out in the roster rules. There's nothing spelled out in the roster rules that say you can't train with the team beforehand or come review video. Whether it is something that he wants to work out with the club on doing that, the best we could find is that Roman Berkey, like Santi said, arrived very early in his ability in 2022 with City. These players are still wrapping up their season. No matter if Toykert played a lot or a little, like Billy Jensen said in our live stream chat, he hasn't been playing starters minutes. Could work out well for us. He could be in better form, but still this break and then time to probably, if nothing else, come to St. Louis and find a home and get all that stuff going before he actually shows up, gets his ITC certified, and registers for play in the U.S., which is at the earliest July 18th.
Stuart, any thoughts on Toykert?
I know. Just looking back to see when Berkey flew in, and he flew in on July 1st, 2022. No, I had a comment for JGR whenever we get to him, but
JGR.
I'm excited. I see him. Everything in my mind sees him as pretty, not a 1-for-1 replacement for Nico, but certainly the closest replacement of anyone that we have on the roster currently. And he's clearly a guy that Let's likes and wants to bring in, and he's excited about St. Louis. And he must have taken that picture. He posted it around midnight. Guessing, I was trying to look up the sun patterns in St. Louis. I'm gonna guess it was 3 or 4 p.m. at latest. So
Stu got his sundial out for that one.
So I know exactly where he took that picture from. So he was right next to the old courthouse.
I think I even saw somebody do a Google Maps of it where they saw that spot, and you could pan around from the arch and then the flag with the courthouse, and then like caddy corner you could see Metropolitan Plaza.
Yeah, so I do wonder if he was at the Inside City event. It would have been a possibility. It gives him a day overnight to rest, get in, and then on the next day he would have started with the, negotiations or, finalizing the contract or whatever. But maybe another tinfoil hat moment. He was there where he was standing because he was there for a photo shoot in front of the.
So I'm gonna ask you guys. Let's assume he was there. Would you recognize him? Would you have recognized him if he was just not on the pitch, like if he was just walking, like with people, walking where people were? Would you have recognized him? I will not have.
No, I wouldn't.
Yeah, I'm not usually good at that. I would say probably not, but I think somebody would have.
Some people have that that gene where they just
Mhm.
recognize. you know
Right,
what I
that
mean?
immediate recognition. I don't have it, but
Me either.
I think somebody would have.
It's that mutant gene. I want to make some comments about like Cedric Teukert's stats. And Matt, I may get some of these wrong. You know, I got really excited because I was like, oh gosh, look at this guy. 11 goals on like
Yep.
The XG was 10.4, right? Non-penalty goals only 5. So
Yeah.
I pump the brakes there a little bit, but at the same time, 0.78 goals per game per 90 minutes. So that's really good. I mean, I don't know how you want to look at it, but that is outperforming Klaus. And I don't know how you look at Bundesliga 2, but I will say that I think MLS shines with its DPs. I think it's a pretty average league across the board. If you want to compare it to Championship in England, I don't know. I think Championship and Bundesliga 2 are like, I do think it's a better league than both of those in most cases, not every
Well-
case, in most cases. But I will just say that like the DPs shine in the attack. And I think you're going to face
Yeah.
similar defenders in MLS as you would in Bundesliga 2 and the EFL to some degree. And so I do think he can be this effective if our system delivers. And so again, I just want to, Matt, I keep just hammering because I think you did such a good job pointing out and reiterating what other pundits have said to some degree, that yes, XG, XA is looking pretty good, but the quality of those passes, those final assists is not incredible. So what can Cedric do with that? Can he add to the assist? Can Klaus and him together, will Klaus not have to pull double duty and be able to play make a little bit more with Cedric finishing it off? That would be really lovely to see. And I think it's possible, but you know,
Well-
it's not a key to unlock every single team in MLS either.
It could work. It could work vice versa too, where Klaus could be the one who's winning those duels, and then it plays off to Tukert, and then he finds Klaus back in the box as he makes his run high. That goes back to something that I asked Roman Berkey in the press conference, which was just his methodology when it comes to distribution. Because Roman Berkey's distribution is so fascinating to me in how quick it is, and I think that plays directly into the system and what we expect and need to expect from just how our progression goes down the field. Roman Berkey said when he gets the ball, he looks up top to Klaus and Sam first and foremost. That is the first place he looks. And if you know Roman Berkey, how quick he operates when he gets the ball, he doesn't take time to evaluate. It is look and immediately go with what your instinct says you should be doing. He looks high and then he progresses back down. So you start with the 9s, then the 10s, then the 6s, then the center backs. And so keep doing that because Klaus can still win those duels 50% plus of the time. Tukert is not projecting as a good aerial duel kind of guy. And I take his projections and his comparisons to what you were just saying, Phil, about the leagues. If you look at FBref, it does its comparisons, and I've posted some of those nice little graphs of the little circle chart, and it sprays out progressive carries, progressive passes, assists, shots, XG, shot creating actions, all this stuff that compares you to your similar players, forwards, attacking mids. So when you compare Tukert to forwards, he projects extremely well in non-penalty goals, total shots, non-penalty XG plus expected AG, so assisting those goals. You have projecting well in, like I said, shots, in blocks, so he's good as a high defender. Progressive passes, progressive carries, successful take-ons, touches, progressive passes, all these passing possession stats, he's incredibly good at. So he's good with the ball at his feet. He has great vision. All of these things that you really need. And I don't feel like we have a very high level player to that extent in our final third that can really change the game. And that seems like what we'd be getting with Cedric Teuchert. And to your point, Phil, about, yes, he's spent time in the 2 Bundesliga. So, how does he stack up against MLS? Well, these comparisons that I just mentioned with the specific stats and the percentages, Cedric Teuchert's comparisons come to what FBref labels as the men's next 14 competitions, which includes MLS, the Argentine Primera, Belgian Pro League, Brazilian Serie A, the Eredivisie, the English Championship, French Ligue 2 or Ligue 2, the German 2 Bundesliga right there, Italian Serie B, Liga MX, the Portuguese Primeira Liga, Spanish Segunda, Copa Libertadores, and the Europa Conference League. That's when you think of like the top 5 and then you think of the next 14, which is how they refer to it, legitimately what you think of. So it makes sense that all of these next tier from the top 5 European leagues, that's what Teukert is being compared to. And he has these outstanding numbers when it comes to shot creating actions, possession numbers, the volume of shots, and his XG and AG. Like a lot of these things that you're wondering, how will he stack up against MLS with the 2 Bundesliga being his experience? The numbers are right there compared to MLS, so much so that his comparable players, the top 10 players, consist of a couple names that everybody knows that's listening to this. Hani Mukhtar with Nashville and Chicho Arango with RSL. And let me tell you, if you're comparing a guy that we're looking to sign to Chicho Arango,
oh my God,
you don't have to say anymore.
I'm sold.
Let's not get out of control here, because I don't know if the pedigree is there to be able to make that kind of a declaration. But I do think, as I was looking at the stats as you were talking, Matt, like his style of play is going to be like those players. It feels like a fox in the box. Yes, he's not giant. He's 5'11", 176 pounds. That's not small either, but I do think he's just going to be that guy that has a knack for a goal. I can't remember if Santi or Stu compared him to Joe Keeney. Like Joe Keeney was a lot like that too, wasn't he?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what Bradley Carnell needs Lutz to sign is a Nico Giochini replacement. Nico Giochini was selected because he not only was available in the expansion draft, but because he would have been such a good fit. I remember when Lutz found out that Nico Giochini was available in the expansion draft. You could see the look on his face in that post-expansion draft at the Hellcat, Stu. I know you were there with me, where he was just shocked. And he was just, I can't believe they made him available. This is, it's a no-brainer. And so having lost Nico Giochini, you want that replacement like for like player to fill a necessary gap in your system.
And also, I find it interesting too, Matt, you mentioned definitely like defending from the front as something that he excels at. And I think that's going to be a common theme today with all of these rumored transfer options. Any thoughts, Stuart? We haven't heard from you on much on Teukert. Would you like to talk about him, or we can move on to? I know you wanted to talk about Girdwood Reich, if you would like to.
I just have one question or one comment about Girdwood Reich before I drop off. Just a personal anecdote. So he plays for Sydney FC. I have to talk to my cousin because their big rival is MacArthur FC, which is in southwestern suburbs, I believe, of Sydney, Australia. And my cousin's, I think, still a season ticket holder. I'll have to ask him his thoughts on JGR, just in general vibes. But he definitely seems like a guy who's high ceiling, and Australians are really excited to send their young guys abroad, both in soccer and just traveling the world, because you could go to anywhere in the world and you run into an Australian and a Scotsman traveling.
I like that. I actually enjoyed seeing in the comments like several Australians being upset that he's coming to the United States instead of Europe. I was like, well, I can relate to that. I've said that about Americans in certain countries for sure. Good thoughts there, Stu. Do you need to head out now, or do you want to? Anything else you'd like to talk about with Girdwood Reich?
Yeah, no, I think I'm just going to drop off. It's been a pleasure, guys, and always fun to pop in.
Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Stu.
Before we get into Girdwood Reich, do we want to give the brief Marco Reus updates?
I wanted to ask one thing about Teukert before we move on. I apologize. Okay. I am moving backwards. I just want to make sure Stu.
You have to move back before you can move forward.
I want to give Stu his chance, and I wanted to make sure he was taking care of his family there. But Teukert, like, how does this add in? In the first part of our show, we talked about Ostrak, Leuven, Indy, and the 10 winger 8 role, and how they can move around in those positions. How does Teukert affect that? Because will we see more 2 striker formations once he comes in, and do we see Indy falling off or other players falling off in the competition as well?
Well, you see one player fall off. I mean, one player has to, just by attrition, right? But I do think that if you're looking at a player that projects to be what Nico Giochini was, at least to us and in our system, that type of a player, you're going to absolutely err on a 4-4-2 being a prevalent formation that we look to. And we know that Bradley Carnell has different looks when it comes to defense versus offense, but just go back to when Klaus and Nico were together last year. It was a 4-4-2. Nico was either underneath Klaus. You could call it a 4-2-3-1 because Nico was underneath. But just like our 10s tend to be a lot right now, whether it's Indy or AZ, they do press high and they get into some of these higher positions where if we create a high turnover, then they're going to take possession right alongside Klaus in ways. And so that 4-2-3-1 becomes just by process of the high turnover, a 4-4-2 in transition. And I think that's where Cedric Teuchert's going to live. He's going to live in between the spaces, in between the channels in a 4-4-2 playing off of Klaus. What I think this will do for the other players is it will remove a true out and out central attacking midfielder like a lot of our looks last year did. We had AZ on the right at times. We had AZ on the left. Indy was on the right a whole lot in that formation. But the difference this year is going to be a healthy Rasmus Alm and where he fits in, because at times Rasmus Alm has been a second striker of his own. And towards the end of the season last year as well, whether it was with Nico, Sam, or Klaus, Rasmus Alm was just as high because of how fast he is and just the amount of pace that he has to get the ball up high on the wings or in the channel. So that's going to be an interesting look. Is you can start to put individual names down with Cedric Teuchert out there. So you'd start with Chris Durkin and Edu Leuven, I think, and then you would list Rasmus Alm, and you would have Teuchert and Klaus probably. And so there's 5 players right there, and you have 1 player left. You have Indy, AZ, Salio, Sam, all left to be selected. So who would you put in there? Because the players I named of Durkin, Leuven, Alm, Teuchert, and Klaus, I would almost write them in pen if they're healthy. Like those are players that I think we've seen them be difference makers in their own right. And I have a tough time right now. I would have a tough time saying Salio should not be that other player.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I've been a huge fan of what I'm seeing from Indy underneath Klaus at the 10 right now. I don't know if that's directly leading into a lot of our finishing issues. Indy's a fantastic presser. He's good with the ball. He does create a lot. We just haven't been able to do much with it. And so I personally would like to see kind of a 4-4-2 that has our typical back four with Chris Durkin, Edu Leuven in the middle, and then outside of them, it's Salio and Rasmus Alm, and then Cedric Teuchert and Klaus. I think that would be a devastatingly strong lineup with some pretty crazy sub options. Looking at Indy, Ostrak, Sam, AZ, that's pretty deadly to me.
Yeah, imagine all those options.
Yeah.
Like all the things you can do when you have so many guys and so many different looks you can use.
Haven't even mentioned guys like Blom and Kojima. Like, I mean, gives some of these players an opportunity to continue to develop without being thrust in the spotlight like a Jose Kojima.
Santiago, I enjoyed your reactions to some of those things Matt was saying. Is there anything you'd like to reiterate or any more thoughts on what he said?
No, I think Matt is spot on, but yeah, just thinking about who is gonna be on that final spot, assuming the lineup is what Matt mentioned. Yeah, you will just have, like, right now I will say Celio, but I think that could evolve game to game depending on the opponent and depending on what look you wanna start with, and different options. And then you can use multiple guys as subs, which City does very well. Most of the games uses the 5 substitutions. So yeah, I like the outlook with this new acquisition of Cedric Teuchert. But moving on from him, I think we're also seeing some stuff on defense. And I was talking with Matt today, like maybe year 3 is when you start seeing like a transition to first spending more, and second is when you start seeing more guys leaving the team and some more newcomers compared to what we saw in 2024.
If you don't mind, I want to jump right into that next. And I just want to comment on some of the things Matt said and comparing like to what Gioacchini what role he played, because he does serve a role in having a second striker underneath, whatever. But you look at the minutes that were given to all of our players, and you look at the competition for starting roles. It's really interesting to see like the stats, how they played out, with Klaus getting a lot of time and getting a certain amount of goals, Sam getting a lot less time and getting very close to the amount of goals that Klaus got, Joe Keeney being one of our top scorers. And he actually didn't, toward the end of the season, I remember Joe Keeney wasn't getting a lot of starts, and it weirded me out for a long time. But I think St. Louis thrives with the competition. I think Bradley Carnell's really enjoying the way training has looked, as Matt has also talked about what he saw, what you witnessed in this week in training. That competition and that hunger to start is there, and it's strong. And I think Bradley Carnell enjoys that. I think he likes to ride who's hot, and then he also really equally enjoys giving someone else a chance. I think he loved rotating the team, even though it didn't go that well on Wednesday, and giving those guys chances. I listened to the City Voice with Akil Watts the other day.
Yes.
And or today, actually. And so you listen to Akil Watts and you're like, man, this guy doesn't get time, but you hear how thankful he is that he's in the place that he is. And that's like that's not an accident. You know what I mean? Like, he has a great attitude. He wants more. He's hungry. He knows he's good enough. Right. And that's just like one of our guys, one of our 20 something guys that want that starting role. And so the more of that, the better. And I think, I look forward to the competition. I look forward to the rotation. And I think we should think about that with Teukert as we talk about Ostrak. Who's better, Indy, Ostrak? I think Indy's one of our best playmakers, and he's younger than people remember. He's like
Very
21,
so.
Guys. And so, like, Indy may be here for 2 to 4 more years and still be a young kid, and his playmaking may evolve into something really special by the time he leaves St. Louis. There's so much time, and I truly think he's one of our best playmakers. And I think people are forgetting some of the amazing passes he does. I think it's between him and Alm in transition with some of the most beautiful passes I've seen this season. So that's something to just monitor. We need results now, and I think Teukert's going to help contribute to that and make it better. But I think the competition is going to play a big role. Thank you for letting me rant so much there. I apologize it went so long, but I do want to move on to the next guys. As you were saying, Santiago, if you want to lead us into that next thing, the defenders and this fun this fun conversation. Like, we have a lot of guys with contracts ending. I mean, let's just put it out there, guys. It's not a fun conversation to have, but it is a conversation that we will have here on Flyover Footy, because we can't not, right? We got to talk about whose contracts are up. These guys coming in, these rumors we're seeing are on the defensive side. Santiago, if you'd like to kind of talk about some of those guys coming in, and we can roll from there.
Yeah. So when my first reaction when I saw the rumor about Gearwood Reich, I was like, well, he's a center back. So I was like, initially I was like, we're okay on center backs. Then my second thought, I was like, oh my god, a U22 team where a U22 signing, we're finally using that mechanism, which is really exciting. But at the same time, I was like thinking, do we really need a center back? And then I started to think about the contract situation. So on the center back department, Tim Parker, his contract expires in 2024. Josh Jarrow's contract also expires on 2024.
You guys are absolutely brutalizing our chat here.
I just found a new
Oh,
thing
no!
I can do.
I can only imagine what people are going through listening to this on Friday or Saturday, because on the live stream, it is devastating people to think about Tim Parker and Josh Yarrow leaving our team after this year.
Guys, I'm not saying they are leaving. I'm just putting it out there. Like,
For what it's worth, everybody remember this was Santiago Beltran who brought
oh no,
this was not me.
you guys set me up.
We did. We set you up. We threw you under the bus.
I cannot believe it.
You
Keep
took the
going
bait.
though. Please continue because we all feel the same. We've all said these things.
But yeah, just knowing some contracts are expiring and that maybe Jara will leave or maybe Tim Parker will leave. We don't know. Both of them could be resigned too. But this is I see it as just that evolution. And I was mentioning earlier that maybe year three on Lutz's plan is when you start spending and refreshing the lineup, bringing some younger guys so they can continue learning. Sorry, I'm just reading the chat.
I'm being
People
very mean.
are really mad at me.
People are letting
I
you hear about this
apologize.
one, Santi. If City doesn't re-sign, it's on you, brother.
Oh my god. Okay, I'm gonna shut up. Maybe you guys can take some of
Well,
the heat
no,
for a moment.
Well, let me put it in
I'm with you,
perspective.
man. Yes,
Yeah,
please do.
this isn't so I told Michelle, my wife, who was saying the same thing earlier. She started to have a next level, continuing the conversation about this introduction to the concept. And I was like, no. We're not even halfway through this season. We cannot talk about this too much. But in the context of why are we looking at two center backs, it's important to remember this long-term planning because it's end of 24. We have very few players whose contracts are up at the end of 2024 without option years after that. It just so happens that, Tim Parker, Josh Yarrow are among those alongside Sam Adeniran. That's actually the list. And everybody else has options. You have some players in 2025 who we're going to have an even worse conversation with, but you have this succession planning. It's thinking through why are we having targets appear when we seem to have depth at these spots. And you just have to remember that Lutz, his previous comments were you sign a player in the summer, they get acclimated, and you hope to have them for the next year and to the end of their contract. And we've had this conversation before. This is the same type of a thing where if you bring in a player like Jake Girdwood-Reich, the 20-year-old from Sydney FC, or you bring in Antonios Papadopoulos, like these are not players who are being targeted for meaningful minutes in 2024, but depending on the contracts they're on, the length of the contract, you could easily see how they would project into the lineup in the future. It's also worth noting that Joachim Nilsson is on contract through 2027. His option year is 2027. So that is a player long term. Michael Wenzel is the other player with City 2 center back that we project that would be seeming like he would step up into a City contract, no matter what it looks like, a 1-and-1 type of a thing. But when you see it, Jake Girdwood-Reich, and you see what the rumored transfer fees are, I really have to hearken the fact that Lutz is he's working within the means that MLS has. With Tim Parker, half of his contract is currently being paid by the Houston Dynamo. When we traded for Tim Parker during the expansion draft back in 2022, we didn't just trade GAM, but we had Houston absorb half his contract for 2023 and half his contract for 2024. He's making over $1 million. If we were to sign him to a new contract, it's expensive. I mean, it's the reality. But what they're looking to do beyond this is potentially say, we have Joachim Nilsson locked up, we have Kyle Hebert locked up, and now we're looking at the next crop. If something happens and we aren't able to move forward with Tim Parker, we have Michael Wenzel, we have Oscar Benitez, we're looking at Jake Girdwood-Reich, we're looking at Antonios Papadopoulos. And Girdwood-Reich, the reason he's so interesting to me, from the moment that I saw this news at like 6 a.m. when I woke up and checked my phone until now, is the U22 mechanism that Santi mentioned. Whether you take Sydney FC's word for the club record transfer fee they're looking for in the $1.3 million range, or you say, oh, this is another Hanover situation, Lutz is not going to pay that, he's going to talk him down, or you say this is another situation on Sydney's front, like I mentioned earlier, like their attacking midfielder, Adrian Mrzeski, where they said he was looking for a club transfer fee and he ended up with half of that. I don't expect Lutz to pay over $1 million, but I wouldn't be surprised if he paid a significant transfer fee. And in the context of MLS and the U22 initiative, if you put a player in the U20 lot, no matter what their salary is, no matter what their transfer fee paid, they hit the rosters at $150,000. That's how much they're costing your team. Think about the value to that over a 5 or 6 year contract, because these U22 deals aren't just valid when you're under 22. U22 deals are valid until you're 25. So if you sign a 20-year-old Girdwood Reich to a 5-year deal, it's basically club control, like you think of an NFL draft pick where you're keeping him at $150,000 until the age 22, and then $200,000 from 23 to 25. That, no matter what his salary is, makes the transfer fee a lot more palatable. And it really gets to the heart, like Santi was saying, of what the U22 initiative was designed to do. It's designed to be able to take a shot, take a flyer, bring in high dollar transfer fees for these young players, no matter what their salary is. And you're really getting them for a steal in your overall roster construction. So yes, it's a project. He's a young kid. He showed a lot of promise. He's converted from a defensive midfielder into a center back for just 1 year. So the assumption right now is that we're targeting him for a center back. But I say this assumption because of what Jabulu Blom was when we brought him in. Jabulu Blom was not a lifer, grew up playing defensive midfield. He grew up playing fullback. He was a right back before we signed him, or for a period of time before we signed him. He had just recently converted before that to defensive midfielder, and that's where we use him at. Sometimes he slots in at right back, but he has flexibility to do that. I see a similar thing with Girdwood Reich in what he could offer us both in the halfback role, but also moving up into the midfield. And there's a lot. So I think all of that together is why I really am excited about this. And that's on top of this fun fact, which I was trying to get to before we started, but there was really no good segue. My fun fact is, if we sign Jake Girdwood Reich, that would mean that we would have a player under contract in all 6 continents, which coincides with the fact that our sporting director played in all 6 continents. So how fun is that? You've got Girdwood Reich from Australia. You have Jose Kojima from Asia. You have a few African players. You have a ton of European players. North America, obviously. South America, Celio, Klaus. That's kind of a fun fact, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I do think a future story for St. Louis might be sporting director for St. Louis City, SC. Lutz Pfannenstiel travels to Antarctica to sign Penny the Penguin to St. Louis City on a 3-year U22 contract. What do you think? Penny the Penguin?
I could deal with Penny the Penguin.
Paulo?
Let's do it.
Can we call him Paulo? Playmaker?
Playmaker. I like that.
I agree, Matt. I love that shout for the U22 thing. That's not something I've thought about. But I do think that as we think about players leaving, I do think more importantly, just like stacking up possibilities in players. We don't know if all of these rumors are going to come true, but they could, right? And I just think there's an interesting thought. I think if we're breaking hearts over Parker, I do think this is going to break some hearts too. Is that I don't know if anyone's considered the possibility of selling Hebert to a Canadian club again. I know I've mentioned that a lot, but that's another one where maybe we sign Parker to a friendly deal, right? To a TAM deal, or, we don't spend quite as much. We say, you're going to be a leader in this club for the next 2 years. You're going to be, enjoy the St. Louis fans, make St. Louis your home. And,
the housing market is crazy. Like I said in our chat, the housing market is crazy. You don't want to be looking in this market.
But he has value to a Canadian club. He has a lot of value, and that's something
I think you told us that you were positing whether Hebert would be sold like the day after he signed a contract or something. It like popped into your brain. It popped into your brain so early because of how the Canadian teams can take advantage of that as far as like their international roster slots.
It's the heartless capitalist in me that thought of that immediately. Which is, to some extent, that's what Lutz has to be to some extent. But anyway, I I think our only massive superpower is Lutz's scouting. You know what I mean? And so like we have to like really take advantage of it and double down on it. And we can't get too tied down. We got to be able to sell players on and use that money to upgrade, constantly upgrade at the cost of our feelings and our emotions at times, I think. So just something out there.
And we've seen proof that Lutz is future planning fairly extensively. Like these names are leaking, like I said earlier, because teams and players and agents have vested interests in them leaking. And so you look at Papadopoulos and you look at Girdwood Reich and their names leaking. Like I think Girdwood Reich is a very easy line to draw that says Sydney or his agent has a reason to leak his name at a club record transfer fee. Like that name, that information doesn't come leaking from St. Louis. It comes leaking from the other side. Same thing with Papadopoulos, where Sky Sports leaked out that U.S. club St. Louis has asked Antonios Papadopoulos about a possible transfer and would like to lure the Greek to MLS. He's going to be off on a free, and so that just came out late on Thursday. Whereas I'm not sure where he projects. Honestly, I haven't been able to find tape on him, but he's listed as a center back. Apparently, he's seen time as a defensive midfielder, so it could be the same kind of scenario as Girdwood Reich, and that's a position that Lutz seems to be targeting. And that's why we're going into these discussions about whose contracts are ending. It puts into perspective because we have seen in the past day or two, especially on Thursday, we saw a lot of why is Lutz targeting center backs? We have Nielsen, Parker, Hebert, Yarrow. Nerwinski can play there in a pinch. Like it's not about now. It's about 1, 2, 3, 4 years in the future. There's a reason Kyle Hebert's contract goes until 2027. Like these are the times Lutz is planning for. Lutz's own contract was extended until 2026. So Lutz is trying to set the club up to be in a good position after he leaves, even at this point. That's how far in the future he's thinking about these things.
And not to mention, I said it's our superpower, so I really pumped up Lutz with that one. Well, let me destroy it by saying we've missed on 3 or 4 fullbacks at this point. You know what I mean? So, not 3 or 4. That's too many.
Well, if you count the expansion draft. I mean, if you count the expansion draft.
Oh, you're right. Yeah. So anyway, I mean, some of these guys are going to miss, right? You got to hedge your bet. You got to spend your money wisely and know that some of it isn't going to work out. And so the more players you bring in and the more possibilities you have, the more you're going to hit on too. So,
and I guess it depends on your definition of a miss, because that was something that I think people were starting to comment on when it comes to Toykert, especially, but also some of these other players in the center back role is, well, they named, I think, obviously Pedro. I think Isak Jensen was even named as a miss, which I think is such a nearsighted thing to see because he didn't. He had a year for St. Louis and then he was loaned out, and he's only like 19, 20 years old still. So
it counts as a medium.
If we were able to bring him back, I think that would add to the narrative, but he's likely to be purchased as that loan with an option to purchase. Johnny Nelson is the guy that I was thinking about from the expansion draft as a miss, but that I can't necessarily classify Johnny Nelson as a miss because he was a free acquisition in the expansion draft and he helped to start us off in 2023. Things cooled off after that and he lost his spot and he tumbled down the depth chart at left back behind Marcanic and Hebert. But there at the start, he did a serviceable job getting us to a point. So like that to me is not a miss. John Bell might be seen as a miss just because he didn't really see any time in the expansion draft. Poor Jake LaCava was a miss because he didn't even make it through the expansion.
I love that one.
Night.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that one.
But yeah, I mean, but otherwise, I have a tough time right now just to call many things he's done a miss. Because at the same time, you could just call slumps misses, and I don't think that's fair. Like you'd say that AZ is a miss in 2024 because he's not shown overall the hype and the capabilities we saw at the end of 2023. That's just players going through things in their development. AZ, Indy, they're so young that I think we need to give some of those players grace and time, and that comes to the sporting director as well in just the decisions that are made in the roster that he puts together.
I enjoyed that question, Matt. A lot of people are asking this right now, so I think it'd be smart to just cover it at the end of the show when no one's probably going to hear it. But unless we trade for international slots. Talk about international slots. This is like the number one question we get every time a rumor is announced about an international player.
Yeah, the good news is that MLS made this a little easier for the everyday fan. You can go to MLS's website and they have the club roster profiles to see what our international slot situation is. And right now, with 2 players on loan who are internationals, we have 1 open international roster slot, and that would be for Cedric Toykert. Beyond that, if we don't sell Isak Jensen and we don't recall Selmer Pedro, or if we don't recall both of them, then we have a decision to make. We will not be able to fit both of them on our roster until we either acquire more roster slots or cut our ties with them. And so this summer, acquiring international roster slots is a very strong likelihood for St. Louis. Last year, I think we ended the season, I want to say, with 11 international roster slots, 10 or 11. It was in the double digits. And this year, we only have 9 right now. We acquired 1 from Nashville SC in the offseason, and we are full up on those. Rasmus Alm, Jabulu Blom, Roman Berkey, Nicholas Dewar, Isak Jensen, Jose Kojima, Klaus, Tomas Ostrak, Selmer Pedro, and Nukvi Thorson are our 10 internationals, with Pedro and Jensen on loan. And so the 1 would be taken up by Toykert. Sorry, we don't need an international roster slot for that. Beyond that, every single other player that we mentioned, looking at obviously Marco Royce, looking at Jake Girdwood-Reich and Antonios Papadopoulos, and whoever else exists out there on the big board of loots across the seas, we would need an international roster slot for. Girdwood-Reich, I just want to add really quick, fascinating backstory on this kid, fascinating background. There's an article that I posted to X that I found from 2022 when Sydney FC played a friendly against, I think, Celtic. Did they play? And they had an Israeli player on their team.
Oh, yeah.
And it was just because the background for Girdwood-Reich is his grandmother was a Holocaust survivor. He has Scottish heritage, and his family lives in Australia. Obviously, that's where he was raised.
They immigrated there after World War II.
He's a global citizen, basically. I mean, this guy has such a vast history, and by all accounts, in interviews with him, he's very well spoken. He seems very mature for his age. And that moment, that article that I posted about the game where he was trying to trade jerseys with his Israeli idol, it was fascinating because it shows also his drive and determination, having sustained a head injury late in the game. And while Celtic went off, while the player went off that he headbutted, he came back on, and even though he received 6 stitches after the game. Now, this is that's the kind of player that we're receiving, is a guy who he desperately wants to finish a game for his club, even in a club friendly. And you know, that's the kind of heart that Lutz wants on his team. So that's another reason those kinds of almost intangibles that I like in these rumors. And we may never hear about Girdwood-Reich again after the next few weeks. You know, it might not come to fruition, but it's fun to talk about that kind of player right now in just projecting what he might do for this club.
Absolutely. And quickly, like it's also really important that, you know, I think it really helps that that Gioacchini was sold on, that Isak Jensen was loaned out. You know, it seems to me like Isak maybe wanted to be loaned out to Denmark to get more playing time, or maybe he was a little homesick, and maybe it was both enjoying that possibility with the sell-on clause. But St. Louis is already establishing themselves very early as a team that's willing to sell their players into a better position, not just for money, but just if that's what they want, that's something we can do because we have Luch Pfennigsteel. And so I do think that's important, that I think a lot of players, I was listening to Extra Time today. It was an older episode from a few days ago, but they were talking to Brian Dunseth about like why people are willing to go to RSL, or like why Chicho Arango was willing to go to RSL and why he was a perfect fit. And, you know, he trusted that organization to go there with his family. He started working the second he got there. And so this is the sort of thing, like being able to draw someone like Reich to come over from Australia rather than going to Europe is something like he trusts coming here because he doesn't believe he'll be stuck here forever. He knows that St. Louis will sell him out or even improve his market for him. And so that's something to keep in mind for like why people are willing to come here. And I also think you should look at, there was a comment about Sam. Is Sam going to leave? It behooves us to make sure we figure out Sam, get him minutes, get him goals and assists, or at least make him look very good. Same with AZ. Anyone that's rumored to go to Europe, get their value up and sell them on, and just continue that tradition of moving people onto Europe from the United States, from St. Louis, Missouri.
One thing I want to add on that is there's a lot of talk about outgoing players, and I've seen comments about it seems like we're just going to have an outgoing player out of nowhere. But in the same vein that Cedric Teukert has not played a massive amount of games, he started like 12 games last year for the 2 Bundesliga. We're not necessarily buying these players off of their immediate production or specific stat lines. It's also about how they're projected to play and how they're being scouted. The stat line might not tell the full story. The eye test from fans might not tell the full story. So if you think about the rumors that existed last year between Sam and AZ, don't assume that those rumors are just gone, because just like we're not bringing in players necessarily or scouting players that have these massive pedigrees, it might not be all about what a player has done in the immediacy, but what they've shown flashes of, what they still project to do based off maybe the little stat lines that they've been able to offer, or how scouts view players when they watch tape. You know, these marketplaces exist where you're able to analyze not just the stats, but the Opta information that exists about how fast a player is, where they are on the field, their heat zones, how well they press, all these things that might go unnoticed if you're just looking at can a player contribute to goals. So we still may have various interests in Sam, AZ, even, I don't know, Jabulu Blom, maybe players who don't set the world on fire for City fans, but they're still young. Maybe they haven't hit the prime of their lives. We just talked about Tim Parker, so this is my mea culpa for bringing this up. But even Indiana Vasilev, a guy who's under contract through this year with 2 option years, that's a valuable player that I'm sure teams are interested in. With, you mentioned his age, Phil. So like we're talking about a lot of players that we haven't thought about them as options to sell because we haven't heard rumors about them. But if you just look at the age of some of these players and either the minutes they've put in or the flashes of brilliance they've shown, there's a lot of things that could happen very quickly when it comes to this summer. And just remember, anytime a rumor comes out, somebody has a vested interest in that rumor being leaked.
Ooh, well said. That's a good one to finish our rumor portion of our show quickly. I'd like to just bring up that the Open Cup, the final stages of the Open Cup, will be broadcast on Apple TV. This is new, massive news that I didn't see coming. I'm not sure how many people did see this coming, because they were being broadcast either on, a YouTube feed that you had to really search for, or I do believe somewhere on.
It was awful.
Paramount, CBS.
It was so bad. It was so bad this year. I'm sorry, but it was awful this year. Like I watched some matches because I took my phone and I cast it to my TV. It was terrible this year. And it was terrible because MLS and USL made it so that every match was unlisted on YouTube, and you had to go to their websites, authenticate your email so that you're in their marketing systems, and then you'd be allowed access to their streams. It was terrible. Last year was decent, the second half of the year, because Paramount Plus brought the games on Golazo, and you had some ability to actually have the match on your TV without some technological aspects to it. But this year was just terrible. And I can't get behind any comment about, well, they were all available on YouTube. If they're not available to find on YouTube in
like a search,
on a search, or going to a page, US Soccer's page or MLS USL's page, it's not worth it. And the numbers reflect that. The Athletic article that came out said that in this year, when you look at the average viewers for YouTube, it was like this last week, the lowest match number was around 2,300 viewers, and the top was like 7,800. Those are terrible numbers to watch a US Open Cup match.
Wow. Yeah, that's really bad.
Like I was appalled when I was looking at that. I thought it was bad, but looking at 2,300 to 7,900 viewers and then comparing to what Apple TV is going to add for MLS Season Pass, Yeah, this is necessary in the same way that Paramount Plus picking it up last year to finish the tournament was necessary. And I'm not getting around the fact that MLS is doing this for some altruistic reason. It's quite obvious that now 5 of the 8 teams are MLS and only one potential host, and one host is not an MLS stadium. Every match has at least one MLS team right now. Yeah, there's an opportunity for USL teams to play each other, I think even in the championship, but MLS is doing this because it highlights their own teams and they have a little better control over certain things. But from a US Open Cup perspective, it was terrible before this year. And that is a travesty for all the amazing games that have happened in the US Open Cup.
Yeah.
So this is nothing but a good thing to me.
Agree. And is it weird that it's on Apple TV, the same home of MLS soccer? Because there does seem to be, a competition there. Is it like, does it speak well on MLS?
It's one of those
because
weird.
they clearly didn't say like,
Yes.
you can't do this. Don't let these guys in, right? But did they help it along? Did they not? Like, what? It weirds me out, the competition between these two groups, US Soccer, MLS, but Apple TV kind of being affiliated with both now.
Well, my thing was, I think it's weird because you have MLS basically saying we're pulling all of our teams out. We don't want to have anything to do with this tournament because it's not high enough quality, which in turn, I think timing wise caused CBS to back out of a deal that they were looking at multiple years to air the US Open Cup like they had for Golazo last year. And then MLS comes back and said, oh, okay, well, the remaining teams are our teams. So, we're going to swoop in. We're going to offer these for free on our platform to drive more viewers globally to our platform to watch our teams. So that's the glass half empty. The glass half full is this. It could be a precursor to more, right? This could be a precursor to MLS seeing viewership numbers for the US Open Cup spiking on their platform, and then saying, okay, maybe we do need to revisit putting our teams in 2025 going forward. We need to revisit our overall strategy in how we can make this work for our teams. And it could lead to something better. That's the glass half full, because MLS has said publicly they're evaluating 2025 going forward in their involvement. Nothing's been determined. This could lead to positivity if the viewership numbers are there. We have seen how much MLS has worked with Apple TV so far this season in a lot of the strategic approaches that they've taken.
You heard it here first. Matt Baker fully breaking news. Matt Baker wants the return of some. That's the half. That's the half. That's the glass half full.
Soccer United Marketing. Did I say that? Is that what I said in a roundabout way?
Oh no, that's what I said. You said. No, not in any way. That's the glass half full option, is that they're working together in some form.
That's fair. Soccer United Marketing. For those who don't know, Soccer United Marketing is basically the marketing wing of MLS, comprised of the same exact owners, but they handled all of marketing for US Soccer for like 20 years. And then MLS was in bed with US Soccer in that way, doing all of their deals for them. That's how MLS made a lot of money while promoting US Soccer.
We never want that to return, of course, on an official level, but some kind of coordination and help of each other would be helpful without it getting gross. So.
The one thing too, and this is the last good thing about this deal, is that all the matches are free.
Yes, massive.
It is on MLS Season Pass. You have to go into the MLS Season Pass app on Apple TV Plus, but every single one of these last 7 US Open Cup matches, regardless of if they're USL versus USL teams or MLS versus USL or MLS, they are free.
That's amazing. And it will be more amazing if we see some cup sets and we see a USL team in the final, or maybe 2.
It'd be so
cool. But yeah, it's amazing. I think it's a little late, and I know Matt explained the CBS possible deal, and that probably had to do something with it. But I hope next year we see some earlier rounds, either on Apple TV or CBS. But yeah, hoping MLS figures out something for next year. But for now, let's enjoy these 7 matches and let's watch some cup sets.
And for the record, I brought Indy up in that last segment.
I love it.
Only because of the quality that he's shown and the age that Phil reminded us of. And so that's an underlying, teams would be stupid not to want Indy.
Yeah.
Not that we would be looking to sell him, necessarily.
Listen,
All-
your
all we-
your name recognition has given you all the hate tonight. I've caught 0 strays for trying to fire Hubert into the moon for some reason.
All we know now is that Matt Baker was trying to sell Indy. Nothing else happened on this show, so that's what
all we
people
know.
will remember.
That's all we know.
For
All right.
anybody who likes to see those clips that sometimes come out on the flyover account, be looking for Santi's. We
Don't
might
do
be
that to
not
me.
re-signing Tim Parker clip.
He
'cause
has
that
editing
may be
powers,
coming.
everyone.
This indie nonsense will never see the light of day past this podcast.
Oh, come on. If you're
No.
gonna put one of me, put yours too.
I see a war between flyover posts and leader sports. Suddenly, it's gonna happen.
Oh no.
All right, we've gone too long, guys. If you've made it this far, man, I do appreciate it. You guys are the real ones. So yeah, that's it. I'll just leave you with this thought. Flyover Footy in no way endorses following every rumored signing to St. Louis City SC on Instagram and posting anything they might post to the world that they might have posted around midnight or 1 a.m., 2 a.m., any pictures of St. Louis, any thoughts about transferring to the United States, anything. These are things we do not endorse.
That's an appropriate disclaimer.
That's it from us, guys. Have a good night.